The hostess didn't even look up from her podium. "Do you have a reservation?" She said it the way people say things they already know the answer to. Not a question, a conclusion. The young woman standing in the entrance of Harlow's didn't answer right away. She looked around the dining room. White tablecloths, candlelight. A sommelier moving between tables with the careful reverence of someone handling something sacred. The kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices, because if you have to ask, you've already answered the question. She was 26 years old, 5'4", in a clean gray hoodie and dark jeans. No jewelry except a small stud in her left ear. Hair pulled back. A canvas tote bag on her shoulder that had seen better days. She looked like she'd come from a study group, or a late shift somewhere. She did not look like she belonged at Harlow's. Her name was Simone Tran. "Yes," she said, 7 o'clock. Tran. The hostess, her name tag read Courtney, finally looked up. She took in the hoodie, the tote bag, the absence of a blazer, a partner, a visible signal of status. Her expression didn't change exactly. It just settled into something. "I don't see it," Courtney said, scrolling her tablet without urgency. "It was confirmed this morning. I'm showing a Tran for 7, but that table is set for 8 guests." Courtney tilted the screen slightly, not enough for Simone to read it, just enough to imply she was being shown something. "I think there may have been a miscommunication." There wasn't. Courtney set the tablet down. She folded her hands. "Miss, Harlow's has a dress standard for evening dining. I'd be happy to suggest some wonderful places nearby that might be a better fit for tonight." Simone looked at her for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "I'm going to sit down now." Courtney's posture stiffened. "I'm sorry, I really can't. At table 14, Simone said. "The round one by the wine wall. I'll wait there." She walked past the podium. Courtney stood very still, watching her go, and reached for the phone. To understand why what happened next would turn Harlow's inside out, you need to understand who Simone Tran actually was. Not who Courtney assumed she was when she looked at the hoodie and the tote bag. Who she actually was. Simone grew up in Garden Grove, California, middle of Orange County, in a neighborhood where Vietnamese grocery stores shared strip malls with check-cashing places and nail salons run by women who worked 12-hour days and called it normal because it was. Her parents had come over in 1994 with $400 and a cousin's address written on the back of a bus ticket. Her father got work at a machine shop. Her mother took in alterations. They didn't talk much about what they'd left behind, but they talked constantly about what came next. Simone was the what came next. She was reading at 3, writing at 4. By the time she was 12, she was doing her parents' taxes because she'd taught herself, because the accountant they'd paying for 6 years had been making mistakes for 6 years, and nobody had caught it. She caught it. She fixed it. She filed the amended returns herself and got her parents back $9,000 they didn't know they were owed. Her father framed the refund check. He kept it on the wall of the machine shop until the day he retired. Simone got a full scholarship to UC Berkeley at 17. Graduated in 3 years, not because she was in a hurry, because she was bored. She went straight into a master's program in computational finance at MIT, finished it in 14 months, wrote a thesis on algorithmic bias in lending decisions that 3 major banks quietly requested copies of before it was even published. She was 22 when she started her first company. It wasn't the company she'd imagined. It wasn't glamorous. It was a fintech platform that helped small immigrant-owned businesses access credit through alternative underwriting models. Models that didn't penalize people for not having the kind of financial history that required having money to begin with. She built it out of a shared office space in Koreatown with 2 laptops and a whiteboard covered in math that her co-founder called aggressively optimistic. It worked. By the time she was 25, the platform had processed over $200 million in small business loans. Default rates were 30% below industry average. The algorithms held. She'd known they would. Andreessen Horowitz led a $40 million Series A. 3 months later, Forbes ran a piece. The headline was "The Quiet Architect." The photograph was Simone in front of a whiteboard. Same canvas tote bag on her shoulder, the one she carried everywhere. Not because she couldn't afford something else, but because it had been her mother's and it worked just fine. None of that was visible in the gray hoodie. That was in part the point. Simone sat down at table 14. She placed her tote bag on the empty chair beside her, folded her hands on the white tablecloth, looked at the wine wall, a floor-to-ceiling grid of backlit bottles arranged by region, and waited. She wasn't nervous. She'd been in enough rooms that didn't want her to know that nervousness was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she had instead was patience and precision. Two things that had gotten her a lot further than nervousness ever could. A waiter appeared at her elbow, young, maybe 23, with the careful professionalism of someone still learning when to make eye contact and when not to. His name was Tyler. "Good evening. Can I get you something while you wait?" "Water, please." "Still." He nodded and left. He came back in 90 seconds with water and a bread basket. He didn't ask her to move. He didn't look at her hoodie. He just poured her water with both hands on the carafe the way they taught you in training, and Simone made a mental note. She had been sitting there for 4 minutes when the manager arrived. His name was Vincent Shea, 44 years old, with the particular build of someone who used to be athletic and now mainly stood very straight to compensate. He wore a black suit, no tie, a small earpiece that served no purpose she could identify. He walked to her table with the careful deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed how to remove someone from a restaurant without making a scene. "Miss." He kept his voice low, intimate almost, the way doctors deliver bad news. "I understand there may have been some confusion at the front." "There wasn't," Simone said. "Our reservation system shows the booking under Tran as a corporate account, and typically those reservations are managed through my assistant, yes, Jessica Yoon. She booked it this morning. I can give you her number if you'd like to verify." Vincent paused, just slightly. "The table is set for 8. My guests will be here at 7:30. I arrived early." Another pause. Longer this time. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the tote bag. He looked at her, 26 years old and sitting at table 14 like she owned the chair. He made a decision. It was the wrong one. "Miss Tran, is it? I want to make sure your evening goes smoothly, which is why I want to be upfront with you." He adjusted his cuff. "Harlow's maintains a certain atmosphere that our guests have come to expect. Our dress standard, your website says business casual or above for evening dining," Simone said. "I'm wearing a clean hoodie and dark jeans. That is, by any standard, casual, the spirit of the policy. Can you show me where in your written policy it says hoodies are prohibited?" He couldn't, because there was no such policy. The policy on Harlow's website had been written 3 years ago by someone who assumed the clientele would self-select and had never felt the need to spell it out in language that could be shown to a lawyer. "I want to be accommodating," Vincent said carefully, "but I do have to consider the experience of our other guests. I'm not affecting the experience of your other guests." I'm sitting here quietly, drinking water that Tyler brought me, waiting for 7 people who have reservations at this table. She paused. "Is there something else?" He looked at her. Something had shifted in his assessment. She could see it. The hoodie was still there. The tote bag was still there. But something in the way she'd spoken, the precision of it, the absence of defensiveness, the way she referenced the written policy from memory, had introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. He excused himself. He went back to the host stand. He spoke to Courtney in a low voice. She pulled up the reservation on her tablet. His face changed when she showed him whatever she showed him. What she showed him was the account behind the booking, the corporate account tied to the name Tran, the corporate account that had a standing reservation at Harlow's for the 3rd Tuesday of every month for the past 14 months, representing a client tab that averaged $4,000 per evening. The account that had, in those 14 months, spent a total of just over $56,000 at this restaurant. Vincent Shea stood at the host stand for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward table 14 with a completely different posture. He didn't make it, because the door opened and the first of Simone's guests walked in. Her name was Renata Cruz, 51 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and the easy confidence of someone accustomed to walking into rooms that expected more of her. She was a general partner at one of the most active venture capital firms in the country. She'd backed 43 companies in the last decade. 12 had gone public. Behind her came Oliver Fitch, 47, former deputy secretary at the Treasury Department, now managing director at a firm that advised sovereign wealth funds. Then came Dr. Priya Mehta, co-founder of a medical AI company that had raised $300 million in its last round. Then 3 more, each of them arriving with the quiet certainty of people who had been important for long enough that they no longer needed to signal it. Tyler, the waiter, saw them come in and immediately began pulling out chairs with the focus of someone recalibrating everything he'd assumed about the next 2 hours. Vincent Shea stood frozen near the host stand. Courtney had gone pale. Renata Cruz spotted Simone at table 14 and walked over without checking in at the podium, without waiting to be seated, and said, "Sorry, I'm early," in the tone of someone who knew they were exactly on time. "You're fine," Simone said. "Tyler's going to take great care of us." Tyler, who had been waiting near the bread station with the alertness of someone who had just realized this was the most important table he would ever serve, straightened immediately. Vincent crossed the dining room. His walk had changed completely. The deliberate, managerial stride was gone. What replaced it was the walk of a man who needed to arrive somewhere faster than he could do so with dignity. "Monsieur Tran," he stopped at the table. "Welcome to Harlow's. I want to apologize for any, Vincent." Simone's voice was pleasant, completely neutral. "I'd like to order." He stopped. "Of course," he said. Renata Cruz was watching him with the particular attention of someone filing something away. Oliver Fitch was looking at the wine list, or appeared to be. Vincent stepped back and let Tyler take over. Tyler, to his credit, did not visibly exhale. The evening proceeded. The food was exactly as good as its reputation. The wine was exceptional. The conversation across the table moved between funding landscapes and regulatory frameworks, and one extended detour into the logistics of a humanitarian project that Dr. Mehta was funding in 3 countries, and which 2 other people at the table were considering joining. The bill, when it came, was just over $5,000. Simone signed it without looking at the total. They were finishing the last of a dessert wine when a woman at the table adjacent to theirs leaned over. She was in her mid-30s, with the careful presentation of someone who had dressed very deliberately for the occasion. Her name was Diana Holloway, and she had been watching table 14 since the moment the guests began arriving. She'd also been watching something else. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Diana said. She was looking at Simone. "Are you? I saw what happened when you came in. I was at the bar." She glanced toward the host stand and back. "I have a food blog, a pretty big one, and I caught some of it on video." She held up her phone. The screen showed a paused clip, a clear frame of Courtney at the podium, and Simone in the gray hoodie being redirected toward the door. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to. I just thought you should know I have it." The table was quiet for a moment. Simone looked at the phone, then at Diana. "What's the blog?" she asked. Diana told her. 300,000 followers, she said. Mostly food and restaurant coverage, but occasionally other things, when they mattered. Simone nodded slowly. "Don't post it tonight." Diana looked surprised. "Okay, give me your email." Diana gave it. Simone looked back at her guests, most of whom had been listening with the practiced discretion of people who were very good at appearing not to. "It happens," Simone said, in a tone that didn't invite pity, only fact. "It happens constantly, to people who aren't sitting at this table and don't have someone at the bar with a phone." Renata Cruz put down her wine glass. She'd been quiet through the exchange. Now she looked at Simone with an expression that carried a lot of history in it. "What are you going to do?" Simone considered for a moment. "The same thing I always do," she said. "Something useful." The next morning, Simone was in her office at 7:45. She called Diana Holloway first. She asked for the video. Diana sent it in 6 minutes, no conditions, no negotiation. She called her attorney at 8, not because she needed to, because there were steps and she'd learned a long time ago that skipping steps cost more than taking them. Her attorney's name was Kevin Park. He was thorough, careful, and hadn't lost a civil discrimination case in 11 years. He watched the video twice, asked 4 questions, and said he'd have a letter drafted by noon. Then Simone opened her laptop. She pulled up the name of the ownership group behind Harlow's. It took her 40 seconds. She knew it already, had known it since before she'd made the reservation, but she wanted to see it written out clearly. The holding company that owned Harlow's restaurant was called Mercer Hospitality Group. 4 properties in the city, 2 more in development, a 5th recently acquired in Seattle. They'd been looking for a strategic capital partner for the expansion. Had been quietly for about 8 months. One of Simone's portfolio companies was a hospitality fund. It had been in preliminary talks with Mercer for 6 weeks. Those talks had been going well, according to the last update from her team. She picked up her phone. She called the fund's managing director, a woman named Cora Finley, who had spent 20 years turning around underperforming hospitality assets, and who, it was often said, could read a balance sheet the way other people read a face. "Cora," Simone said, "I need you to pause the Mercer conversation." A brief silence. "How long a pause?" "Indefinitely for now. I'll explain later." "Understood." Cora asked nothing else. She'd worked with Simone long enough to know that "I'll explain later" was not evasion, it was sequencing. By 10 a.m., Kevin Park had sent the draft letter to Harlow's ownership and management. By noon, the video went live on Diana Holloway's blog. She'd written a piece around it. It was careful, specific, and not inflammatory. It described what she had witnessed, in the order she had witnessed it. It included the timestamp of the reservation confirmation. It included Simone's name, with Simone's permission, and a 1-line description. Founder and CEO, $40 million Series A, 14 months of reservations at this same restaurant. By 3 p.m., the piece had been shared 12,000 times. By 6, it had been picked up by 3 food and culture outlets, one of which was national. Courtney, the hostess, did not come in for her shift that evening. The manager on duty said she'd called in sick. It was the kind of sick that has nothing to do with a fever. Vincent Shea came in. He spent most of the evening in his office. The phone at the host stand rang 17 times in the first hour of service. 14 of those calls were not reservation inquiries. The general manager of Harlow's, a woman named Patricia Aldous, who had spent 30 years building exactly the kind of institution she wanted and was now watching it get taken apart on social media over a gray hoodie, called Simone's office at 4:30. She got voicemail. She called again at 5. She got voicemail. At 5:45, she sent an email. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph expressed profound regret. The second outlined the action she intended to take with respect to staff training and reservation handling policies. The third asked for the opportunity to speak directly with Simone at her earliest convenience. Simone read it at 6:30, on her way out of the office. She forwarded it to Kevin Park without a response. 2 days later, she replied. 1 sentence. Her schedule had an opening on Thursday at 2. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Patricia Aldous came alone. She didn't bring lawyers, which Simone noticed. She sat across the table and said, directly, without the corporate language that usually cushioned these things, that what had happened was wrong and that she was responsible for it, not because she had personally instructed anyone to do anything, but because the culture she had built had allowed it. That was harder to say than the apology, and she said it anyway. Simone listened. At the end, she said, "I'm not interested in a settlement. I'm interested in something that actually changes something." Patricia Aldous leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what that looks like," she said. It looked like this. A formal revision of Harlow's reservation and seating policies, written in actual language, posted publicly. a bias and inclusion training program for all front-of-house staff, designed and led by an external firm with completion required for continued employment. A standing scholarship, funded jointly by Mercer Hospitality Group and Simone's Foundation, for culinary and hospitality students from underrepresented backgrounds, specifically first-generation college students. Annual reporting submitted to Simone's Foundation on staff composition and complaint resolution data. Patricia Aldis agreed to all of it, in writing. By the end of the week, the Mercer Capital conversation did not resume. Simone put those funds elsewhere, a Black-owned hotel group expanding into 4 mid-sized cities. 3 restaurant concepts founded by immigrant chefs who had spent years working in the kitchens of places that would never seat them in the front of the house. She didn't announce any of it. Her team knew. The founders knew. The money moved. Courtney did not return to Harlow's. Officially, the departure was mutual. Unofficially, there is no version of that story where showing an account that spends $56,000 a year at your restaurant the door because she arrived in a hoodie ends quietly. Vincent Shea was reassigned to a back-of-house operations role. He did not object. He had spent 2 days watching the video from 3 different devices, listening to his own voice say the spirit of the policy with the careful cadence of someone who believed he was being reasonable, and found he had very little argument left. Tyler, the waiter, received a commendation in his employee file. He was also promoted to floor lead, a position that had been informally reserved for staff with longer tenure. The decision was made by the incoming floor manager, who had read the blog piece, watched the video, and decided she wanted to know the names of every person who had handled the situation with dignity. Tyler was the first name on the list. Diana Holloway covered the follow-up on her blog. The piece got fewer shares than the original. That's how these things always go. The accountability never travels as far as the outrage. But 3 culinary students in the city received scholarship notifications that fall, each letter carrying Harlow's letterhead and a foundation seal, and none of them knew the full story of how the money got there. They just knew someone had made it possible. Simone didn't give an interview about it. She got 3 requests, 2 from journalists she respected, 1 from a podcast she listened to, and she declined all of them, politely, with a note that said the same thing each time. The story wasn't really about her. The journalist who had written the Forbes piece called her 3 months later, not about this, about something else entirely, and at the end of the conversation asked if she'd ever reconsider. Simone was quiet for a moment. "What I want people to understand," she said finally, "is that I had the video. I had the attorney. I had the receipts, literally, 14 months of them. I had a table full of people who could back up every word. Most people who walk into a room and get told they don't belong don't have any of that." She paused. The hoodie wasn't the point. It was never the point. The point is that nobody should need an acquisition agreement or a Forbes profile or a $40 million raise to be treated like a person. She let that sit. "So no," she said. "I don't think the story is about me. The scholarship program is still running. It expanded in its 2nd year to include a mentorship component, pairing recipients with working professionals in hospitality, culinary arts, and food media. Simone sits on the advisory board. She doesn't publicize it. If you asked her about it at the right moment, she'd probably tell you it's the part of the whole thing she's most proud of. Then change the subject before you could make it sentimental. That's the kind of person she is. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly, before you answer. Not about Simone, not about Courtney or Vincent or anyone who made the wrong call that night. About the dining room. About the 14 other tables that were full of people who watched a young woman in a gray hoodie get redirected toward the exit, who saw the manager cross the room with that particular walk, who heard the careful, bloodless language of someone trying to remove a person without a scene and said nothing. What would you have done? Because Diana Holloway was there. She had her phone. She made one choice, quietly, without confrontation. That ended up mattering. One person decided the moment was worth paying attention to. If any part of this story hit something real in you, share it. Because someone you know has a story like this, has probably had a dozen of them, and most of them never got a camera or an attorney or a dining room full of witnesses. The conversation this starts is the whole point. Like, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.